What she didn't know was that by noon the next day, she'd be frantically calling me in tears, demanding to know why her luxury downtown apartment had just appeared on every major real estate website with a price-reduced must-sell listing. Before we dive into this incredible story of family manipulation and the ultimate power move that changed everything, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens when a 70-year-old woman finally decides she's had enough of being treated like a burden by the daughter she spent decades supporting. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 2 years ago, when I made what I thought was a loving decision to help my struggling daughter get back on her feet after her divorce. A decision that would teach me the most painful lesson of my life about the difference between being supportive and being taken advantage of. But to understand how I ended up being offered a basement storage room as my living space before becoming the person who held all the cards in my family's financial future, you need to know who I was before I let my maternal love cloud my business judgment. For 38 years, I was Margaret Chen, successful property manager and real estate investor. In San Francisco, I didn't just manage buildings, I built wealth through strategic property acquisitions and tenant relationships. My company, Golden Gate Properties, managed over 200 residential units across the Bay Area, from luxury high-rises in Soma to charming Victorian apartments in the Mission District. I started with nothing but a real estate license and a $3,000 inheritance from my grandmother when my husband David died suddenly at 42 from a stroke, leaving me with a 16-year-old daughter and a future. I had to build entirely on my own. But loss, I discovered, could become the foundation for incredible determination. My first property was a rundown duplex in Oakland that everyone else considered a lost cause. The previous owners had let it deteriorate for years, and it had been sitting vacant with code violations and unpaid taxes. I bought it for $25,000, spent 6 months and another $18,000 renovating it myself, learning everything from basic plumbing to tile work through community college courses and weekend workshops, and turned it into 2 beautiful rental units that covered my living expenses and gave me seed capital for my next investment. That duplex taught me everything I needed to know about real estate. Other people's problems could become your opportunities if you had the vision and work ethic to see the potential beneath the surface damage. By the time Rachel graduated from high school, I owned 6 properties across the East Bay. By the time she finished college at UC Berkeley, I had built my property management business to handle buildings for other investors while continuing to acquire my own rental portfolio. When the dot-com boom hit San Francisco in the late 90s, I was perfectly positioned to benefit from the surge in housing demand. I wasn't just buying and selling properties, I was creating communities. The Sunset Gardens complex that I renovated and managed became known for its cultural diversity and affordable rent stabilization. The Pacific Heights building I restored won a Historic Preservation Award. The Mission District apartments I acquired and improved helped longtime residents stay in their neighborhood during rapid gentrification. By my 50th birthday, my portfolio included 23 rental properties across San Francisco and Oakland. By my 60th birthday, I was regularly featured in the San Francisco Chronicle's business section as one of the city's most successful female property investors. The mayor appointed me to the Housing Advisory Commission. The California Association of Realtors invited me to speak at their annual convention about sustainable property management and community development. Had built something that went far beyond personal wealth. I had created a business that provided quality housing for hundreds of families, while generating the financial security that would allow me to support my daughter through any challenges life might bring her. My personal life during those years was equally fulfilling. After David's death, I had focused entirely on building security for Rachel and myself. But as my business grew and stabilized, I began to enjoy the fruits of my decades of hard work. I traveled extensively, often combining business trips with personal exploration. I spent 3 weeks in Japan studying their approach to efficient urban housing, which inspired several successful renovation projects in my Chinatown properties. I toured sustainable communities in Sweden and Denmark, bringing back ideas that helped me transform a struggling Oakland apartment complex into an award-winning green living community. I collected contemporary Asian art, supporting local artists, whose work reflected the cultural richness of San Francisco's diverse neighborhoods. My Nob Hill apartment became a gathering place for charity fundraisers, cultural events, and business networking dinners. I hosted the annual Asian American Business Association Gala for 8 consecutive years, raising over $400,000 for small business development programs. I was actively involved in Rachel's life throughout her childhood and young adulthood, attending every school play, dance recital, and graduation ceremony. I paid for her education at UC Berkeley, where she studied communications, and I was proud when she graduated with honors despite changing majors twice during her college career. When she moved to Los Angeles after graduation to pursue opportunities in the entertainment industry, I supported her both financially and emotionally. When she met Derek, a screenwriter with serious literary ambitions, I welcomed him into our family and was genuinely happy about their engagement. I paid for their engagement party at a beautiful venue in Malibu, contributed $25,000 toward their wedding costs, and helped them with the down payment on a stunning West Hollywood apartment that would serve as their creative headquarters while they both built their careers. I thought I was investing in Rachel's happiness and future stability. What I didn't realize was that I was creating a pattern of financial dependence that would eventually become so entrenched that my daughter would lose all perspective on the difference between earning her lifestyle and having it provided for. Her Rachel had always been what I diplomatically called creatively ambitious, but practically unrealistic. As a child, she was constantly starting elaborate projects that required significant financial investment but rarely produced lasting results or valuable skills. At age 12, she decided she wanted to be a fashion designer and convinced me to enroll her in expensive sewing classes and buy her a professional-grade sewing machine, fabric, and supplies that cost over $800. She produced exactly 3 garments, a skirt, a simple dress, and a jacket that didn't quite fit properly, before deciding that fashion design was too technical, and she was more interested in fashion styling. At 14, she discovered photography and begged for professional camera equipment. I spent $2,400 on cameras, lenses, and lighting equipment, plus another $600 on a photography workshop at the community college. She took hundreds of photos over the next 8 months, primarily of herself and her friends, before concluding that she preferred being in front of the camera rather than behind it. In high school, she became passionate about theater and convinced me that she needed professional headshots, $400, acting classes, $200 per month, and the extensive wardrobe for auditions, $1,200, to pursue her dream of becoming a professional actress. She performed in exactly 2 school plays before deciding that she was more interested in the business side of entertainment than performing. Each pursuit was presented as her true calling, the activity that would define her future career and personal identity. Each required substantial upfront investment in equipment, classes, or experiences that would give her the foundation she needed to succeed. And each was abandoned within a year when the initial excitement wore off and the actual work required became apparent. I supported every interest because I believed that exploration was part of growing up and that having resources would allow Rachel to discover her genuine talents and passions without being limited by financial constraints. I also believed that eventually she would find something that sustained her interest and commitment long enough to develop real expertise and career potential. Looking back, I realized that by removing all financial consequences from her choices, I may have actually prevented her from developing the persistence and problem-solving skills that come from having to make investments work because you can't afford to abandon them. When Rachel met Derek during her senior year at Berkeley, I was hopeful that a serious relationship would provide the emotional stability and practical grounding that had been missing from her previous pursuits. Derek was intelligent, well-educated, and genuinely committed to his writing career. He had already sold 2 short screenplays to independent filmmakers and was working on a feature-length script that had attracted interest from several production companies. More importantly, Derek seemed to understand the entertainment industry in realistic terms. He knew that building a successful writing career required years of consistent work, networking, and gradual skill development. He wasn't chasing overnight success or looking for shortcuts to fame and fortune. Their early relationship seemed to bring out the best in both of them. Rachel became more focused and goal-oriented, taking her communication studies more seriously, and developing genuine interest in the business aspects of media and entertainment. Derek became more social and optimistic, benefiting from Rachel's natural enthusiasm and extensive network of contacts. When they graduated and moved to Los Angeles together, I was genuinely excited about their prospects. Rachel had secured an entry-level position at a digital marketing agency that specialized in entertainment clients. Derek had connected with a literary agent who was actively shopping his feature screenplay. They seemed to be building adult lives based on realistic career planning and mutual support. I helped them with the down payment on their West Hollywood apartment because I believed it was a sound investment in their future. The location would be perfect for their industry networking, and the apartment itself was in a building that was likely to appreciate significantly in value over the next several years. What I didn't understand at the time was that my help with their housing costs had created a lifestyle foundation that was completely unsustainable on their actual incomes. The apartment I had helped them afford was in a neighborhood where the average resident earned twice what Rachel and Derek were making combined. To maintain their quality of life in that location, they needed to spend money on clothing, dining, entertainment, and transportation that aligned with their surroundings rather than their paychecks. And because I had established a pattern of helping with major expenses, they began to see my financial support as a permanent part of their household budget rather than temporary assistance. Over the next 5 years, my occasional help became systematic lifestyle subsidization. I was covering their car payments when Derek's screenwriting income was unpredictable. I was paying for their vacations when Rachel wanted to maintain her social media presence with travel content. I was handling their medical expenses when their entry-level jobs didn't provide adequate health insurance coverage. Most significantly, I was covering the gap between their rent and what they could actually afford on a monthly basis. The apartment that I had helped them buy required monthly expenses that consumed nearly 70% of their combined income, leaving very little room for the lifestyle they wanted to maintain in West Hollywood. But instead of recognizing this as a problem and adjusting their living situation or spending habits, they began to treat my financial support as a natural resource that allowed them to live above their means without consequences. Rachel would call me with requests that were always framed as temporary emergencies or investment opportunities. The car needed $200 in repairs that they couldn't afford to delay. Derek had an opportunity to attend a screenwriting conference that would cost $800, but could lead to important industry connections. Rachel's job required her to maintain a professional wardrobe that was beyond her current budget. Each request made sense individually and was presented as a strategic investment in their long-term success rather than a bailout for poor financial planning. I agreed to help because I could afford to, because I wanted them to succeed, and because I believed I was supporting their efforts to build stable, independent lives. What I failed to recognize was that my consistent financial assistance was actually preventing them from developing the budgeting skills, spending discipline, and realistic lifestyle expectations that would eventually allow them to live independently. The crisis that led to Rachel's divorce began with what Derek called fundamental differences about money and priorities, but was actually a conflict between someone who wanted to live within their means and someone who had never learned what their actual means were. Derek's screenwriting career had developed slowly but steadily over their 5 years in Los Angeles. He had sold several scripts to cable networks, developed ongoing relationships with 2 production companies, and was earning approximately $45,000 per year from his writing work. Combined with Rachel's $38,000 salary from her marketing job, they had a household income that could support a comfortable middle-class lifestyle in many parts of Los Angeles. But it couldn't support the lifestyle they were actually living in West Hollywood, which required approximately $85,000 per year. To maintain comfortably, the $42,000 gap between their income and expenses was being covered by my regular financial contributions, which had become so routine that Rachel barely acknowledged them as assistance, rather than family resources that were naturally available. Derek began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with their dependence on my support, especially as his own career became more established and he started earning more consistent income. He suggested that they could move to a less expensive neighborhood, reduce their entertainment and dining expenses, and live entirely on their own earnings. Rachel resisted these suggestions, arguing that their current lifestyle was an investment in their careers, and that moving to a cheaper area or reducing their spending would actually hurt their professional prospects. She pointed out that they could afford their current lifestyle with family help that was freely offered, and that there was no reason to sacrifice their quality of life when alternatives were available. "My mother can afford to help us, and she wants to help us," Rachel told Derek during one of their increasingly frequent arguments about money. "Why should we struggle unnecessarily when we have family support that allows us to live comfortably while building our careers?" Derek's response revealed the fundamental difference in their values. "Because I want to know that the life we're living is the life we've actually earned. I want to know that our success is real, not subsidized. And I want to know that we could maintain our lifestyle even if your mother decided she didn't want to support us anymore." The argument escalated when Derek pointed out that they had no emergency savings, no retirement funds, and no realistic understanding of what their actual living expenses were because so many costs were being covered by me. If something happened to my ability or willingness to provide financial support, they would face immediate financial crisis. Rachel's response was that family members support each other through different life stages, that my help was temporary assistance while they built their careers, and that Derek was being ungrateful for the generosity that allowed them to live in a beautiful apartment and pursue their creative goals without financial stress. But Derek had done the math and realized that my temporary assistance had totaled over $200,000 during their 5 years together. That wasn't occasional help with emergencies. That was systematic funding of a lifestyle they couldn't afford independently. When Derek insisted that they needed to reduce their expenses to match their actual income, Rachel accused him of being jealous of her family's financial resources and unwilling to accept help that was freely offered by people who loved them. When Rachel refused to consider any lifestyle changes that would reduce their dependence on my financial support, Derek realized that they had fundamentally incompatible approaches to money, independence, and adult responsibility. The divorce conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in March, 3 years ago. Derek had prepared a detailed breakdown of their finances that showed exactly how much money I had contributed to their lifestyle over the previous 5 years and what their monthly expenses would need to be if they wanted to live independently. "Rachel, I love you, but I can't continue living this way," he said, showing her the spreadsheets he had created. "We're 32 years old, and we're living like teenagers whose parents pay for everything. I need to know that I'm building a real adult life, not playing house with someone else's money." Rachel was devastated, not just by the divorce request, but by Derek's characterization of their lifestyle as artificial and unsustainable. From her perspective, they had been building successful careers while enjoying the benefits of family support that allowed them to live comfortably and pursue their goals without financial stress. The divorce was completed within 6 months and was relatively straightforward from a legal standpoint. They had no children, minimal shared assets, and no disputes about property division. Derek moved out of the apartment and found a modest one-bedroom place in Silver Lake that he could afford on his writing income alone. Rachel was left with the West Hollywood apartment, her marketing job, and the sudden realization that without Derek's income and without the lifestyle subsidy she had become accustomed to receiving from me, she could no longer afford the life she had been living. That's when she called me with the request that would begin the most challenging 2 years of our relationship and ultimately lead to the basement storage room conversation that changed everything. "Mom, I need to ask you for something big," Rachel said during that tearful late-night phone call. "I can't afford to stay in LA right now, and I need time to figure out my next steps. Could I come stay with you in San Francisco while I get back on my feet?" The request seemed reasonable and temporary. Rachel was going through a major life transition, needed emotional support after her divorce, and required time to develop a new financial plan that would allow her to live independently. I had a spacious 3-bedroom apartment in Pacific Heights, with beautiful views of the bay, more than enough room for both of us, and certainly enough financial resources to support an additional household member while she stabilized her situation. "Of course, sweetheart," I said immediately. "You can stay as long as you need to. We'll figure everything out together." What I didn't realize was that I had just agreed to an arrangement that would gradually transform from temporary post-divorce support into systematic lifestyle subsidization, and eventually into a situation where my own comfort and dignity in my own home would become secondary to my daughter's convenience and preferences. The stage was set for 2 years of slowly escalating demands and gradually diminishing respect that would culminate in the most outrageous request I had ever received from anyone in my family, and the most decisive response I had ever given to anyone who underestimated exactly how much power a 70-year-old woman could wield when she finally decided she'd had enough. When Rachel arrived at my Pacific Heights apartment in June 2023 with 3 suitcases and 2 boxes of essential belongings, I thought I was welcoming my daughter home for a temporary healing period after her difficult divorce. What I was actually doing was opening the door to the most systematic erosion of my personal boundaries and domestic authority that I had ever experienced. The first month felt like exactly what I had hoped it would be: a chance for mother and daughter to reconnect after years of her living in Los Angeles, an opportunity for me to provide emotional support during a challenging life transition, and a way for Rachel to save money while she figured out her next steps professionally and personally. Rachel seemed genuinely grateful for the arrangement. She thanked me repeatedly for letting her stay, insisted on helping with cooking and cleaning, and spent hours telling me about her marriage, her career frustrations, and her hopes for starting fresh in San Francisco. We took long walks through the city, visited museums and galleries, and had the kind of deep conversations we hadn't shared since she was in college. "Mom, I can't tell you how much this means to me," she said one evening as we sat on my terrace, watching the sunset over the bay. "I know I've made some mistakes with money and relationships, and I really want to use this time to get my life on track." "That's what family is for, sweetheart," I replied. "Take all the time you need to figure things out." I meant it sincerely, but I had no idea that all the time you need would gradually transform from a few months of recovery into an indefinite lifestyle arrangement that would fundamentally change the dynamics of my home and my life. The changes began so subtly that I didn't recognize them as a pattern until much later. Rachel would make small suggestions about household arrangements, rearranging the living room furniture to improve the flow, reorganizing the kitchen cabinets for better efficiency, changing our dinner schedule to accommodate her preferred meal times. Each suggestion seemed reasonable and was presented as a way to make our shared living situation work better for both of us. Moving the antique reading chair from the living room to my bedroom would give us more space for yoga and stretching. Rearranging the kitchen would make cooking easier and help Rachel contribute more effectively to meal preparation. I agreed to these changes because they seemed minor, and because I wanted to be accommodating to someone who was adjusting to a major life transition. I also agreed because Rachel presented each suggestion as a way to make our shared space more functional, rather than as imposing her preferences on my home. But cumulatively, these small changes began to transform my apartment from a space that reflected my personality and lifestyle into a space that accommodated Rachel's vision of how we should be living together. The formal dining room, where I had hosted business, dinners, and charity planning meetings for years, became Rachel's workspace for her freelance marketing projects. The living room, with its carefully arranged antique furniture and art collection, was reconfigured to accommodate Rachel's yoga practice and meditation routine. My home office was partially converted to provide storage for Rachel's belongings that hadn't fit in the guest bedroom. More concerning than the physical changes were the subtle shifts in household decision-making. Rachel began making unilateral decisions about grocery shopping, meal planning, and daily schedules, always framing these decisions as helping mom by taking things off her plate. When I mentioned wanting to host my book club at the apartment, Rachel gently suggested that it might be too much stress for me and too disruptive to her work-from-home schedule. When I wanted to hire a cleaning service, as I had for over a decade, Rachel insisted that she could handle the cleaning and that paid help would be an unnecessary expense when we're both here to maintain the apartment. Each individual decision seemed reasonable, but together, they created a pattern where my preferences and routines were gradually being replaced by arrangements that served Rachel's convenience rather than my comfort. The most troubling aspect of our evolving living arrangement was the gradual shift in financial expectations. Initially, Rachel had offered to contribute to household expenses according to her limited means, and I had told her not to worry about money while she was getting back on her feet. But as weeks turned into months, Rachel's financial contributions became smaller and less regular while her consumption of my resources grew larger and more assumption-based. Her freelance marketing work was inconsistent and didn't pay well, but instead of seeking more stable employment, she seemed to expect that I would cover the growing gap between her income and her expenses. The guest bedroom became her permanent workspace, requiring additional furniture, better lighting, and upgraded internet service. Her freelance work required specialized software subscriptions, professional development courses, and networking events that somehow always needed to be funded by me. Meanwhile, household expenses that I had managed independently for years were now being treated as shared family costs that naturally fell to me as the person with more resources. Groceries became more expensive because Rachel preferred organic and specialty foods that cost twice as much as what I had been buying. Utilities increased because she worked from home and required constant air conditioning, heating, and high-speed internet. Most significantly, Rachel began making lifestyle purchases that she justified as necessary for her professional development or emotional well-being, but which I was expected to fund. New clothes for client meetings became my responsibility because I had so much more room in my budget. Expensive wellness treatments became family expenses because I should want to support her healing process. None of these expenses were explicitly demanded, but they were presented in ways that made refusal seem selfish or unsupportive. I was made to feel that questioning these costs meant I didn't care about Rachel's career development or emotional recovery. By the end of her first year, living with me, I was covering virtually all household expenses, plus funding lifestyle and activity costs that exceeded what I had spent when living alone by more than $40,000 annually. The most insidious change was the gradual erosion of my authority in my own home. Decisions that had always been mine to make, what to have for dinner, what temperature to keep the apartment, what television shows to watch in the living room, became group decisions where Rachel's preferences increasingly took precedence. When I wanted to host charity fundraising meetings, Rachel suggested that having strangers in the apartment regularly was disruptive to her work schedule and created security concerns. When I wanted to redecorate the guest bathroom, Rachel pointed out that since she was using it daily, any changes should reflect her preferences as well as mine. My daily routines, morning coffee on the terrace, evening reading in the living, Room, weekend visits from friends were gradually modified to accommodate Rachel's schedule and activities. I found myself asking permission to use rooms in my own apartment, or apologizing for disrupting Rachel's work with my personal plans. The shift was so gradual and was always presented in terms of household harmony and consideration for each other. I was made to feel that insisting on my preferences was selfish, that truly caring about family meant being flexible and accommodating. But flexibility only went in one direction. My routines could be changed to accommodate Rachel's needs, but Rachel's activities were rarely modified to accommodate my preferences or comfort. As Rachel's first year in San Francisco extended into her second year, her job search became increasingly half-hearted and her freelance work became more sporadic. Instead of developing a concrete plan for independent living, she seemed to be settling into a permanent arrangement where I provided housing, financial support, and domestic management, while she pursued various creative and professional interests without any real accountability for results. The freelance marketing work that had initially seemed like a stepping stone to more stable employment became her primary occupation, despite generating very little income. Rachel would spend hours on projects that paid $200 or $300, then celebrate. These small payments as evidence that her business was growing and becoming more successful. "Mom, I had a great month," she would announce when she had earned $800 from her various freelance projects. "I think I'm really starting to build momentum with my marketing consultancy." But $800 per month couldn't cover even her basic personal expenses, much less contribute to our household costs. The gap between her income and her expenses was being covered entirely by me, while she maintained the fiction that she was building a successful independent business. More troubling was Rachel's apparent loss of any sense of urgency about becoming financially self-sufficient. When I gently suggested that she might want to look for more stable employment, she would explain that traditional jobs would interfere with building her consultancy and that giving up on her entrepreneurial goals would be settling for less than I'm capable of achieving. When I pointed out that her current income wasn't sustainable long-term, she would remind me that many successful businesses take years to become profitable and that I had always encouraged her to pursue her dreams rather than taking jobs just for financial security. She had turned my years of supporting her creative interests into justification for indefinite financial dependence, reframing my generosity as an investment in her eventual success, rather than recognizing it as unsustainable subsidization of her lifestyle choices. By the spring of 2024, Rachel had completely abandoned any pretense of temporary living arrangements. She spoke about our apartment when talking to friends and referred to long-term plans that assumed she would continue living with me indefinitely. She had joined the expensive yoga studio near our apartment and signed up for a year-long membership that cost $2,400 charged to the credit card I had given her for household emergencies. She had enrolled in a professional development program for marketing consultants that required a $3,200 tuition payment, again funded by me as an investment in her career. Most tellingly, she had started dating someone new, a man named Kevin, who worked in tech and earned a substantial salary. But instead of seeing this relationship as an opportunity to develop adult independence, she seemed to view it as another source of lifestyle enhancement that didn't require her to become financially self-sufficient. Kevin would often join us for dinner at the apartment, and I watched Rachel present our living situation as a strategic choice rather than a necessity. She would describe our arrangement as multi-generational living and talk about the benefits of sharing resources and supporting each other's goals. "It's actually really smart," she would tell Kevin. "Instead of throwing money away on rent for a small apartment, I'm able to save money and invest in my business while spending quality time with my mom. It's a win-win situation." But there was no saving happening and no real business investment. Rachel was spending more money than ever on lifestyle expenses, professional development programs, and social activities, all funded by me while she maintained the illusion that she was making smart financial choices. One of the most frustrating aspects of our evolving living situation was watching Rachel document our life together on social media in ways that completely misrepresented the reality of our relationship and financial arrangement. Her Instagram account, which she maintained for both personal and professional purposes, presented a curated version of our life that bore little resemblance to the actual dynamics in our household. Photos of meals that I had prepared and paid for were tagged as examples of multi-generational cooking and family collaboration. Pictures of our apartment and its beautiful furnishings were presented as Rachel's sophisticated lifestyle choices rather than my decades of careful collecting and decorating. My art collection, antique furniture, and carefully designed living spaces became the backdrop for content that portrayed Rachel as a successful consultant living in her family's elegant San Francisco apartment. The books, artwork, and cultural artifacts that I had assembled over 40 years were presented as elements of Rachel's refined aesthetic and the Chen family's sophisticated lifestyle. Most infuriatingly, Rachel had begun incorporating me into her content as a prop rather than a person. Photos of me cooking dinner were captioned as "learning traditional recipes from Mom." Pictures of me helping with her business projects were presented as examples of family mentorship and intergenerational knowledge sharing. My charitable activities and professional achievements were referenced as background for the values that shaped our family. I was being used to add authenticity and credibility to content that was essentially promoting Rachel's personal brand, but I was never credited as a contributor or partner. Instead, I was presented as a supporting character in her lifestyle story. The most frustrating part was that this content was being created in my home, using my resources and featuring my life. But I had no control over how I was portrayed or what aspects of our family life were shared with strangers on the internet. When I expressed concerns about privacy and asked to review content before it was posted, Rachel explained that authentic, spontaneous content was more engaging than staged posts, and that asking for approval would compromise the natural family dynamics that made her content appealing to potential clients. Essentially, I was told that my comfort and privacy were less important than the marketability of her content. As Rachel became more comfortable with our living arrangement, her behavior toward me began to shift from grateful daughter to entitled household manager. She started making decisions about my social activities, daily routines, and even my appearance based on what she thought was best for me or most convenient for our shared living situation. When my longtime friend Patricia Hensley invited me to join her for a weekend trip to Napa Valley, Rachel expressed concern that the travel might be too tiring for me and suggested that I should focus on maintaining my health and energy rather than taking trips that could be stressful. When I mentioned wanting to update my wardrobe with some new clothes, Rachel volunteered to manage my shopping and explained that she had better taste and more current fashion sense that would help me make better choices. When I received invitations to charity events and business functions, Rachel would review them and suggest which ones were worth my time and which ones I should decline to avoid overcommitting myself. These intrusions were always presented as caring concern for my well-being, but they had the effect of infantilizing me and creating justification for Rachel's oversight of my decisions. Most troubling was Rachel's gradual assumption of control over my financial decisions and business affairs. She began opening my mail and sorting it into categories of importance, helping me by handling routine correspondence and bill payments, and offering to manage my investment accounts to reduce my stress. When I received calls from my property management company or financial advisors, Rachel would often answer the phone and explain that I was very busy and that she could handle basic questions or schedule appointments on my behalf. She had somehow convinced herself that I needed her management and oversight, despite the fact that I had been successfully managing complex business affairs and substantial financial assets for decades before she moved in with me. The most manipulative tactic that emerged during this period was Rachel's use of emotional manipulation to justify increased control over my activities and decisions. She would express worry about my health, safety, or decision-making capacity, whenever I resisted her suggestions or insisted on maintaining my independence. "Mom, I'm just concerned about you," she would say when I questioned her interference, in my social plans or business affairs. "You're doing so much for me, and I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself too." Any sign of normal fatigue, temporary stress, or minor forgetfulness was seized upon as evidence that I needed more support and supervision. When I mentioned feeling tired after a long day of meetings, it became proof that I was overexerting myself. When I forgot where I put my car keys, it was a sign of concerning memory issues. When I felt frustrated with a difficult client, it was evidence that I was under too much stress. These expressions of concern were always accompanied by offers to help by taking over responsibilities and decisions that I was perfectly capable of handling myself. Rachel offered to manage my property maintenance issues to reduce stress. She volunteered to handle my correspondence and appointment scheduling to make things easier. She suggested I didn't need to attend certain business meetings because delegating might be better for your health. The cumulative effect was to create a narrative that I was becoming frail and dependent, even though I was actually healthier and more active than many people my age. This narrative was then used to justify increased control over my life and decreased respect for my autonomy. When I pushed back against these limitations or insisted on maintaining my independence, I was accused of being stubborn or not taking care of myself. Rachel would express worry that I was in denial about my changing needs and capabilities. Perhaps the most ominous development during this period was the emergence of casual discussions about the future of my property and financial assets. These conversations were always presented as practical family planning rather than attempts to influence my decisions, but they revealed assumptions about inheritance and control that I found deeply disturbing. Rachel began making comments about when I inherit the apartment, and discussing changes she would make to better suit her lifestyle and career needs. She talked about which rooms she would convert to different purposes, how she would update the decor, and what modifications would make the space more suitable for modern living. She started researching estate planning strategies and would share articles about tax-efficient wealth transfer and intergenerational financial planning. She suggested that I should consult with estate planning attorneys to make sure everything is properly structured for my future. Most concerning were the subtle suggestions that I should consider transferring some assets to her while I was still alive to avoid inheritance taxes and ensure smooth transitions. These suggestions were always accompanied by assurances that such transfers would be just legal formalities and that I would, of course, continue to control everything. When I expressed reluctance to discuss such arrangements, I was told that being proactive about estate planning was simply responsible financial management and that resisting such discussions was unfair to the family member who needed to understand her future security. The underlying message was that my property and wealth were not really mine to control indefinitely, but family resources that should be managed for Rachel's benefit, with her input and involvement in decision-making. By the winter of 2024, 18 months after Rachel had moved into my apartment for temporary post-divorce recovery, I was living as a guest in my own home. My routines revolved around Rachel's schedule. My finances supported lifestyle choices I had no input in making. My social life consisted primarily of activities and obligations that Rachel approved of. My business interests were managed around Rachel's convenience rather than my professional priorities. I had somehow become the least important person in my own household, despite being the person whose resources made everything possible. Rachel operated with the assumption that my role was to provide funding and support for her goals and activities, while her role was to allow me to participate in her life as a grateful and accommodating mother. My preferences, comfort, and autonomy were consistently treated as less important than household harmony, which seemed to mean my willingness to accommodate Rachel's needs without asserting my own. Patricia Hensley, one of the few friends who still visited regularly despite Rachel's subtle discouragement of my social activities, continued to express concern about the changes she observed. In my life and personality, Margaret, honey, you've stopped making decisions about your own life, she said during one of our coffee meetings. Everything you do now is filtered through Rachel's preferences and schedule. That's not healthy for either of you. She was right, and I knew it. But I also felt trapped by my own generosity and maternal instincts. How do you establish boundaries with an adult child who is living in your home? How do you demand respect from someone you love? How do you prioritize your own needs when doing so might harm your relationship with your only daughter? I spent months wrestling with these questions, feeling guilty for being unhappy with an arrangement that was supposed to be mutually beneficial, and wondering if my discomfort was simply the natural adjustment period for adult children living with aging parents. What I didn't realize was that Rachel was preparing to test just how far she could push her advantage. She had successfully established herself as the primary decision-maker in my household, convinced me to fund her lifestyle indefinitely, and isolated me from outside support and perspective. Now she was ready to take the final step in her systematic takeover of my life, removing me from the spaces I had created and paid for, and relegating me to whatever accommodations were most convenient for her expanding lifestyle needs. The basement storage room conversation that would become the breaking point was already being planned, though I didn't know it yet. Rachel had convinced herself that I was now so dependent on her companionship and so committed to maintaining our relationship that I would accept any living arrangement she proposed. She was about to discover that she had seriously miscalculated the limits of my patience and the extent of my power. But first, she would push me just a little bit further than I was willing to go. And when she did, the 70-year-old woman she had systematically marginalized would remind her exactly who owned the apartment she had been treating as her personal property. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. Rachel had established her dominance gradually and systematically, assuming that my acceptance of small indignities meant I would accept larger ones. She was about to learn the difference between choosing to be generous and being forced to be submissive, and I was about to remember exactly who I had been before. I let my love for my daughter override my respect for myself. The conversation that would change everything happened on a cold February morning in 2025, almost 2 years after Rachel had moved into my apartment for what was supposed to be temporary post-divorce recovery. I was in the kitchen preparing my morning coffee when she approached me with what she called an exciting solution to our space challenges. "Mom, I've been thinking about our living situation," Rachel began, setting down her laptop where she'd apparently prepared a presentation. "Kevin and I have been getting more serious, and I think we've found a way to make everyone more comfortable while giving us all the space we need." I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. After nearly 2 years of watching my home and life be gradually taken over, any conversation about optimizing our living arrangement filled me with dread. "What kind of solution are you proposing?" I asked carefully, though I suspected I already knew this wasn't going to be good news for me. Rachel opened her laptop and showed me a series of photos and floor plans that she'd apparently been researching for weeks. "We want to convert the basement storage area into a beautiful, private living suite. It would have its own entrance through the building's lower level, a kitchenette, a full bathroom, and a comfortable sleeping and living area. It would be like having your own apartment, while still being part of our family." I stared at the images on her screen, trying to process what she was suggesting. "You want to convert the basement storage area into a living space?" "Not just any living space," Rachel jumped in quickly. "A beautiful, customized suite designed specifically for your needs and preferences. Think about it. You'd have complete privacy when you want it, but you'd still be right here with family when you want companionship." Kevin, who had been quietly sitting at the kitchen table during this presentation, nodded enthusiastically. "Margaret, Rachel showed me the basement space, and with the right renovation, It could be really beautiful. We're talking about a full, apartment-style conversion with proper lighting, flooring, and all the amenities you'd need. The proposal was presented with such enthusiasm and apparent thoughtfulness that I almost missed the fundamental problem. They were suggesting I move out of my own apartment to live in the basement storage area. But this is my apartment, I said slowly. Why would I move into the basement when I already have my own bedroom and living space here? Rachel's expression became earnest and concerned. Mom, we've noticed that you sometimes seem overwhelmed by all the activity up here. You've mentioned feeling like you don't have enough private space, and we thought this would be the perfect solution. When did I mention that? Well, not in so many words, Kevin said, but we can tell when you're feeling stressed by our work calls and daily activities. And honestly, the main apartment layout isn't really ideal for 3 adults with different schedules and needs. So your solution is for me to move into the basement? Into a beautiful custom apartment, Rachel corrected. Mom, this would be like having your own luxury studio. We've researched contractors and we can have it completed in just 8 weeks. Polished concrete floors, custom cabinetry, a gorgeous bathroom with a walk-in shower, everything designed exactly to your specifications. Kevin leaned forward, his expression sincere and persuasive. Margaret, think about what you'd gain. Complete independence, but with family right upstairs. Your own kitchen so you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Your own climate. Control so you can keep it exactly the temperature you prefer. Your own entertainment setup so you don't have to coordinate with anyone else for TV time. They had clearly rehearsed this presentation and anticipated my objections. For every concern I raised, they had a response that made their proposal sound reasonable and beneficial. What about my current bedroom, my office space, all my furniture and belongings? We'll move everything you want into your new suite, Rachel assured me. And honestly, it might be a good opportunity to downsize a bit. You've accumulated so many possessions over the years, and this would be a chance to keep only the things that really matter to you in a more manageable space. I had never expressed any desire to downsize my possessions. In fact, every item in my apartment had been carefully chosen and held significant personal or financial value. And what happens to the main apartment? What would you use the additional space for? Rachel exchanged a quick look with Kevin before answering. Well, we'd naturally need to spread out a bit more. Kevin's been working from home more often, and he really needs a proper office space for his tech consulting work. I need more room for my marketing projects and client meetings. We've been feeling pretty cramped, trying to share the guest bedroom, as both sleeping and working space. And my home office? We thought that could become Kevin's workspace, Kevin said. I've been doing a lot of video conferences lately, and I really need a quiet, professional environment for client calls. They were planning to take over my entire apartment while moving me into the basement. My bedroom would become something else. My office would become Kevin's workspace. My living spaces would be repurposed for their expanding lifestyle and career needs. But the way they presented it, I was the one who would benefit from this arrangement. I would gain privacy and independence. They would be doing me a favor by creating a custom living space designed for my comfort and preferences. How much would this conversion cost? I asked. We've gotten quotes from several contractors, Rachel said, pulling up another screen. For a really high-quality conversion with all the features we've discussed, we're looking at approximately $75,000 to $85,000. And who would pay for this? Another glance between them. Well, it would be an investment in your comfort and our family's living situation, Rachel said. We thought it would be appropriate to handle it as a household expense. Household expense. Meaning I would pay $80,000 to convert my own basement storage area into living space so I could move out of my own apartment and let them take over the main rooms. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Rachel said quickly. But Mom, we're really excited about this project. We think it's going to make everyone so much happier and more comfortable. And the sooner we get started, the sooner you can start enjoying your new independence. Over the following days, they continued to present the basement conversion as an exciting opportunity rather than the fundamental displacement it actually represented. They showed me Pinterest boards of beautiful basement apartment conversions. They brought me contractor estimates and timelines. They discussed design elements and layout options as if my enthusiasm for the project was a given. Rachel even arranged for me to visit a similar basement apartment conversion in a building across town, where an elderly man had been convinced by his family to move into a beautifully renovated basement space while his adult children took over his main apartment. "See, Mom?" Rachel said as we toured the space. "This is exactly what we're talking about. Mr. Rodriguez is so happy with his setup. He has everything he needs, complete privacy, and his family is right upstairs when he wants company." What Rachel didn't mention was that Mr. Rodriguez looked profoundly sad and isolated, and that his beautiful basement apartment, despite its high-end finishes, felt like a luxurious prison designed to keep an inconvenient elderly person out of the way. They had convinced themselves, or wanted me to believe they had convinced themselves, that moving me into the basement was an act of generosity rather than an eviction from my own home. When I didn't immediately embrace their basement conversion proposal, Rachel and Kevin launched a systematic campaign to convince me that their plan was not only reasonable, but necessary for family harmony and my own well-being. The campaign began with what seemed like innocent observations about the challenges of our current living arrangement. "Mom, I noticed you seemed frustrated yesterday when Kevin had that long conference call while you were trying to read," Rachel mentioned during breakfast. "That's exactly why the basement suite would be such a blessing for you. You'd never have to deal with household noise again." "Margaret, I could tell you were stressed when I had to take that client call during your book club meeting," Kevin added. "With your own space, you'd never have to worry about our work activities interfering with your personal time." They began to frame every minor inconvenience of shared living as evidence that I desperately needed the solution they were offering. If Kevin took a work call while I was watching television, it proved I needed my own space. If Rachel had a client meeting during my dinner preparation, it demonstrated the necessity of my own kitchenette. If I had to wait to use the bathroom in the morning, it showed why I needed my own private facilities. But the pressure campaign also included more subtle manipulations designed to make me feel guilty for not embracing their plan. "We just want you to be happy, Mom," Rachel would say with apparent sincerity. "We can see that living with busy working adults isn't always easy for you, and we want to find a solution that gives you everything you need." Kevin would add, "Margaret, we love living here with you, but we want you to love having us here too. If our current arrangement isn't working for you, we want to fix that." They presented my hesitation about the basement conversion as evidence that I was unhappy with our family living situation and that they were trying to accommodate my dissatisfaction. My reluctance to move into the basement was reframed as ingratitude for their thoughtful solution to problems I hadn't actually complained about. The manipulation became more sophisticated when they started discussing their relationship timeline and future plans in ways that made my decision about the basement seem like the key to their happiness and stability. "Mom, Kevin, and I have been talking about taking our relationship to the next level," Rachel said during one of our evening conversations. "But we need to know that we have stable, long-term housing before we can make serious commitments like engagement and marriage." "The thing is," Kevin explained, "I've been essentially living here for months, but I still have my own apartment that I'm paying rent on. It's not financially sustainable for me to maintain two places indefinitely. So, we need to figure out whether this living arrangement is going to work long-term," Rachel continued. "Because if it's not, Kevin and I might need to find our own place together, which would mean leaving San Francisco because we can't afford anything comparable in the city." The message was clear. If I didn't agree to move into the basement, they would move out entirely, and I would lose my connection to Rachel and any possibility of being part of their future family. They were presenting me with a choice between agreeing to live in the basement or losing access to my daughter entirely. They had calculated that my attachment to family would override my objection to being displaced from my own home. When gentle persuasion and emotional manipulation didn't work, the pressure became more direct and the timeline became more urgent. "Mom, we've already contacted contractors and started the permit process," Rachel announced one morning. "We wanted to move forward with the timeline we discussed so you can start enjoying your new space as soon as possible." "I never agreed to move forward with the project," I protested. "But you said you'd think about it," Kevin replied. "And we thought that meant you were on board with the general concept. We just wanted to handle the logistics so you wouldn't have to worry about the details." They had proceeded with planning and spending as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. They had made financial commitments and timeline promises based on the assumption that I would eventually accept their proposal, because I had no choice. "Margaret, the contractor is available to start next week," Kevin continued. "If we don't take this slot, we might have to wait months for another opportunity. We really think it's best to move forward now. And honestly," Rachel added, "living in a construction zone isn't going to be comfortable for anyone. The sooner we start, the sooner everyone can settle into their permanent arrangements." They were pressuring me to approve an $80,000 project that would displace me from my own home by claiming that delays would be inconvenient for the family. But the most manipulative aspect of their campaign was the way they had begun to present my resistance as evidence of cognitive decline or emotional instability. "Mom, I'm worried that you're having trouble processing change," Rachel said when I continued to express reluctance about the basement conversion. "Sometimes older adults become very rigid in their thinking and have difficulty seeing the benefits of new arrangements. Maybe we should have Dr. Patterson evaluate whether you're making decisions based on logic or just emotional resistance to change," Kevin suggested, referring to my longtime physician. They were pathologizing my completely rational objection to being moved into the basement, suggesting that my resistance was a symptom of age-related cognitive problems, rather than a reasonable response to an outrageous demand. The conversation that finally broke my tolerance happened on a Saturday morning, when I was trying to enjoy coffee and read the newspaper in my own kitchen. Rachel and Kevin approached me with contractor estimates and what they called final details for the basement conversion project. "Mom, we need to make some decisions about the basement suite," Rachel said, spreading papers across the kitchen table where I was trying to eat breakfast. "The contractor needs answers about electrical requirements, plumbing fixtures, and flooring. Choices." "I haven't agreed to this project," I said firmly. Kevin's expression became patient in a way that was unmistakably condescending. "Margaret, we understand that change can be difficult, especially for someone your age. But sometimes we have to embrace new arrangements that will make everyone happier in the long run." "Someone my age?" "Well, seniors sometimes have difficulty adjusting to new situations even when they're beneficial," Rachel explained. "We just want to make sure you understand how much better this arrangement will be for everyone." "Rachel, I'm 70, not 90, and I'm perfectly capable of understanding the implications of your proposal." "Of course you are," Kevin said quickly. "But maybe you're not seeing all the advantages. Margaret, this basement suite is going to be amazing. You'll have complete independence, total privacy, and your own space designed exactly for your needs." "My needs? Or your need to take over my apartment?" The question hung in the air for a moment before Rachel responded with the kind of strained patience usually reserved for difficult children. "Mom, this isn't about taking over anything. This is about creating a living arrangement that works better for everyone. The main apartment will still be your property, but it will be configured in a way that gives everyone appropriate space and privacy." "Appropriate space, which means I get the basement while you get the apartment." "You get a custom apartment while we handle the responsibilities of maintaining the main apartment," Kevin corrected. "Think about what you'll be freed from, dealing with visitors, managing household maintenance, handling all the burdens of being the primary resident. Those aren't burdens to me. This is my home." Rachel leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Mom, can we be honest here? You're not getting any younger, and this apartment is getting harder for you to manage. We've noticed you seem tired more often, and we're worried about you trying to maintain such a large space by yourself. I maintain this apartment with professional help that I can easily afford. But wouldn't it be easier to have a smaller space that's designed for your current needs? Kevin asked. Margaret, we're not trying to push you out. We're trying to create a situation where you can age in place comfortably while still being close to family. Age in place, in the basement, while they took over my apartment. And what if I say no? I asked. Rachel and Kevin exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Rachel answered. Mom, we hope you won't say no, because we think this is really the best solution for everyone. But we also have to be realistic about our needs and future plans. What does that mean? Kevin took over, his voice gentle but firm. It means that our current living arrangement isn't sustainable long-term. I need proper workspace for my consulting business. Rachel needs room for her marketing projects and client meetings. We both need to think about what's going to work best for our relationship and our professional goals. And if this apartment can't accommodate all of our needs in its current configuration, Rachel added, we might need to consider other living arrangements. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. If I didn't agree to move into the basement, they might move out entirely, taking my access to Rachel and leaving me alone in my apartment. Are you threatening to move out if I don't agree to your basement conversion? We're not threatening anything, Kevin said quickly. We're just being honest about our needs and trying to find a solution that keeps our family together while meeting everyone's requirements. Because frankly, Mom, Rachel continued, Kevin and I have been talking about whether this living arrangement is working for us long-term. We love being close to you, but we also need to consider what's best for our relationship and our future. Together. They were presenting me with a choice between agreeing to live in the basement or losing access to my daughter. They had calculated that my attachment to family would override my objection to being displaced from my own home. That's when I realized they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. Sitting at my own kitchen table, listening to my daughter and her boyfriend explain why I should pay $80,000 to move into my own basement storage area so they could take over my apartment, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity about my situation. For nearly 2 years, I had been gradually accepting smaller indignities in the name of family harmony. I had allowed my routines to be disrupted, my space to be taken over, my resources to be consumed, and my authority to be undermined because I believed that was what good mothers did. I had told myself that the problems were temporary, that the benefits of having Rachel close outweighed the inconveniences, and that my discomfort was a small price to pay for being part of my daughter's life as she rebuilt after her divorce. But the basement conversion proposal stripped away all the rationalizations and revealed the truth about my situation. I had become a tenant in my own home, and now I was being evicted to make room for the real residents. Rachel and Kevin had spent months conditioning me to accept that their needs came first, that my preferences were less important than family harmony, and that my role was to facilitate their goals rather than pursue my own. They had gradually convinced themselves that I was becoming a burden rather than recognizing that I was the person making their lifestyle possible. They had reframed my generosity as dependency and my accommodation as evidence that I needed their care and management. But most importantly, they had made the critical error of assuming that my kindness was weakness, and that my love for my daughter meant I would accept any treatment they chose to impose. You know what? I said, standing up from the kitchen table and looking at both of them directly. You're absolutely right. Our current living arrangement isn't working. Rachel looked relieved. So you'll consider the basement conversion? No, Rachel. I won't consider the basement conversion. But I will solve our space problem. Kevin looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that you're right about needing to reconfigure our living arrangement. But instead of me moving into the basement, I think it's time for both of you to move out. The silence in the kitchen was profound. "Mom, you can't be serious," Rachel said. "Where would we go? We don't have the resources to move out right now. Kevin still has his lease, but we can't afford to maintain two separate places. That's not really my problem anymore, is it? You've made it clear that this apartment doesn't meet your needs and that you'd be happier in a different arrangement. I'm simply agreeing with your assessment." Kevin's expression shifted from confusion to panic. "Margaret, we didn't mean we wanted to move out. We meant we wanted to optimize our current living situation." "By moving me into the basement?" "No, Kevin, I think Rachel was right the first time. You need proper workspace for your consulting business. Rachel needs room for her marketing projects. This apartment clearly can't provide what you need." "But, Mom," Rachel protested, "we've been here for almost 2 years. I've built my entire life around living in San Francisco. My clients are here, my routine is here, and Kevin's been planning to give up his apartment to live here full-time." "Then, you should have thought about that before you decided to redesign my living situation without my input." I could see them both recalculating, realizing that their pressure campaign had backfired spectacularly. "Mom, maybe we approached this wrong," Rachel said, her voice becoming conciliatory. "Maybe we should table the basement conversion idea and just focus on making our current arrangement work better. You know what, Rachel? I think you approached our entire relationship wrong, and I think it's time I approached it differently too." What Rachel and Kevin didn't know was that while they had been planning my displacement to the basement, I had been making some very interesting phone calls to some very important people. The first call had been to James Wu, one of San Francisco's most successful real estate developers and my former colleague from the Housing Advisory Commission. James and I had maintained a professional relationship over the years, and he had often expressed interest in acquiring prime real estate in Pacific Heights. "Margaret Chen, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you?" "James, I have a business proposition that might interest you. How would you like to acquire one of the most beautiful apartments in Pacific Heights?" "I'm always interested in prime real estate. What property are we talking about?" "My apartment. 3 bedrooms, 2,800 square feet, completely renovated. Bay views, historic building, Pacific Heights location." "Margaret, your apartment is spectacular, but I thought you loved living there." "I do love the apartment, James, but my living situation has become complicated. I'm considering all my options, including selling." "What would you be looking for in terms of price and timeline?" "Market value, which I believe is approximately $3.2 million. And as for timeline, how quickly could you close if we reached an agreement?" "If the property is as I remember and the financials work out, I could close in 3 weeks." "Margaret, are you serious about this?" "I'm very serious. But James, I should mention that there are currently occupants living in the apartment who would need to be given appropriate notice." "Occupants? I thought you lived there alone." "It's a family situation that has become untenable. The current occupants will need to find alternative housing arrangements." "I understand. Margaret, would you like me to come take a look at the property this week?" "That would be perfect." The second call was to Sandra Martinez, one of San Francisco's most respected real estate attorneys, who had handled several property transactions for me over the years. "Sandra, I need to understand my legal options for a property sale involving family members who are currently living in my apartment without a formal lease agreement." "Margaret, are you considering selling your home?" "I'm considering all my options." "What would be the legal requirements for notifying current occupants about a sale?" "If they don't have a formal lease, they would be considered tenants at will, which means you could terminate their occupancy with 30 days written notice. If you're selling the property, the new owner could require vacant possession at closing. And what if the current occupants refuse to leave? Then they would be trespassing, and you could pursue legal remediation through the courts." "But Margaret, this sounds like a complicated family situation. Are you sure a sale is the best approach?" "Sandra, let me ask you something as a legal professional. If someone has been living in a property for nearly 2 years without paying rent, consuming resources, and now demanding that the property owner move into the basement storage area to make room for their needs. What would you call that situation? Would call that exploitation, and possibly elder abuse depending on the circumstances. That's what I thought. Sandra, I want you to prepare sale documents and eviction notices. I want everything legally bulletproof. How quickly do you want to move forward? I want to be ready to execute everything within 3 weeks. The third call was to Patricia Hensley, my longtime friend, and the only person who had consistently supported my concerns about my living situation. Patricia, I need to ask you for a favor, and I need you to keep this conversation completely confidential. Of course, Margaret. What's going on? I'm selling my apartment, and I need a place to stay for a few weeks while I find a new living situation. Margaret, what happened? Did Rachel and Kevin do something? They suggested I move into the basement storage area so they could have more space in the main apartment. And they wanted me to pay for the basement conversion. Those people. Margaret, of course you can stay with me as long as you need, but are you sure about selling? That apartment is your sanctuary. Patricia, the apartment is just a building. My sanctuary was my independence and dignity. If the apartment is no longer serving that purpose, it's time to deploy my assets differently. Where will you go long-term? I'm looking at several options. There's a beautiful penthouse in a luxury building in Soma that just came on the market. Full-service building, concierge, maintenance-free living, and absolutely no room for ungrateful family members. Margaret, I'm proud of you for choosing yourself for once. The fourth call was to David Kim, one of San Francisco's most exclusive real estate agents who specialized in luxury properties. David, I need you to quietly research luxury condos and penthouses in Soma and downtown. Something elegant, low maintenance, with excellent security and privacy. Margaret, are you looking to downsize? I'm looking to optimize. I want a beautiful space that's entirely my own, where I can entertain when I choose to and have solitude when I prefer it. I have several properties that might interest you. There's a penthouse at Millennium Tower that's absolutely stunning. 2,200 square feet, city and bay views, top floor privacy, full service building. How much? $2.4 million, but I think we could negotiate. David, I want to see it this afternoon. The Millennium Tower penthouse was everything I hadn't realized I was missing. 2,200 square feet of elegant, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking both the city and the bay. 2 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, and a wraparound terrace perfect for entertaining or solitude. The building offered concierge services, valet parking, a fitness center, and 24-hour security. The other residents were successful professionals and retirees who valued privacy and sophisticated living. Most importantly, it was entirely my space, designed for my comfort and preferences, with no room for family members who might gradually take over my life. David, I want to make an offer, I said after spending 2 hours touring the property and building amenities. Excellent. What price point are you considering? Full asking price? Cash offer? 3-week closing. Margaret, that's very aggressive. Are you sure you don't want to negotiate? David, I'm 70 years old. I don't have time for negotiations. I want this property, I can afford this property, and I want to move forward immediately. Within 24 hours, my offer was accepted. Within 48 hours, James Wu had toured my apartment and made his own full-price offer. Within 72 hours, I had signed contracts to sell my apartment and purchase my penthouse. Sandra Martinez had prepared all the legal documents, including 30-day eviction notices for Rachel and Kevin. Everything was in place for the most satisfying real estate transaction of my career. 3 weeks later, on a bright March morning, I woke up in my apartment for what would be the last time. Rachel and Kevin were still unaware that anything had changed, though they had been increasingly puzzled by my cheerful acceptance of their basement conversion timeline, and my sudden lack of resistance to their household management decisions. Had spent those 3 weeks being the most accommodating mother and host imaginable. I had agreed to every request, funded every expense, and appeared to embrace every suggestion they made about our family living arrangements. They thought they had finally worn down my resistance and convinced me to accept my reduced role in my own household. They were about to discover that they had been catastrophically wrong about my motivations and capabilities. At 10 a.m., James Wu arrived with his attorney, closing documents, and a cashier's check for $3.2 million at 10:30 a.m. The moving truck I had secretly arranged arrived to collect the personal belongings I had quietly packed over the previous weeks. At 11 a.m., Sandra Martinez arrived with eviction notices and legal documents. At 11:15 a.m., I had the most satisfying conversation of my adult life. "Rachel, Kevin, could you please join me in the living room? We need to discuss a change in our living arrangements." They arrived looking slightly annoyed at being interrupted from their morning routines, but still completely unaware that their world was about to change. "I wanted to let you know that I've sold the apartment," I announced calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. "You what?" Kevin managed to whisper. "I sold the apartment. To James Wu, who you may remember as one of San Francisco's most successful developers. He's purchasing it as an investment property." Rachel found her voice first. "Mom, you can't sell the apartment. We live here. My whole business is based here. Our entire life is here." "Your entire life was here," I corrected. "But as you explained to me just 3 weeks ago, this apartment doesn't meet your needs, so I've solved that problem for you." Kevin looked like he was going to be sick. "Margaret, when did you do this? How did you do this without telling us?" "I did it over the past 3 weeks while you were planning my move to the basement." I decided that rather than reconfigure my living situation to accommodate your needs, I would reconfigure my entire life to prioritize my own needs. "But where are we supposed to go?" Rachel demanded. "That's not my problem anymore. Sandra Martinez has prepared 30-day eviction notices for you. You have until the end of the month to find alternative housing arrangements." Sandra stepped forward and handed each of them legal documents. "These notices comply with California tenant law and give you the legal minimum time to relocate." 30 days? Rachel's voice was rising. "We can't find a place and move in 30 days? "You can and you will," I said firmly, "because the alternative is being removed by the sheriff's department for trespassing." Kevin looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been respect. "Margaret, this is insane. You can't just sell your apartment and kick us out because you're upset about the basement conversion." "Kevin, I'm not upset about the basement conversion. I'm educated about the basement conversion. It taught me exactly how little respect you have for me and how far you're willing to push your advantage." "But what about our relationship?" Rachel demanded. "What about being a family? What about all the time we've spent building our life together?" "Rachel, we haven't been building a life together. You've been building your life using my resources while gradually eliminating my presence from my own home." I stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the bay view that had been mine for over 15 years. "You spent nearly 2 years gradually convincing me that my preferences didn't matter. My comfort was less important than your convenience. And my authority in my own home was subject to your needs and Kevin's career requirements." I turned back to face them. "You made the mistake of believing that my kindness was weakness and that my love for you meant I would accept any treatment you chose to impose." "But Mom," Rachel protested, "we never meant to make you feel unimportant. We love you, and we want you to be part of our family." "Then you should have treated me like a valued family member instead of like a convenient resource to be managed and eventually displaced." What happened next was the moment I had been anticipating for 3 weeks. Rachel and Kevin began to realize that their financial situation was far more precarious than they had understood. "Margaret, maybe we can work something out," Kevin said, his voice becoming desperate. Maybe the basement conversion wasn't the best idea. Maybe we can find a different solution. Maybe we can, I agreed. But it won't involve this apartment because I no longer own this apartment. Rachel looked confused. Where are you going to live? I've purchased a penthouse at Millennium Tower, 2,200 square feet, city and bay views, concierge, services, and space for exactly one person to live exactly as she chooses. A penthouse? Kevin's voice was faint. $2.4 million paid in cash, which I was able to afford because I'm worth approximately $12 million, not including the $3.2 million I just received for this apartment. The expressions on their faces were priceless. For nearly 2 years, they had treated me like a financially dependent widow who should be grateful for their company and management. They had never bothered to understand the extent of my wealth or the reality of my financial independence. $12 million? Rachel whispered. Rachel, did you think your mother built a successful property management company without accumulating substantial wealth? Did you think I was funding your lifestyle and supporting Kevin's transition to living here because I had limited resources and needed to feel useful? We didn't know, Kevin stammered. You didn't know because you never asked. You made assumptions about my financial situation that served your convenience, and you never bothered to verify whether those assumptions were accurate. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I had prepared for this moment. Sandra, would you please explain to Rachel and Kevin what they're losing by being evicted from this property? Sandra opened her legal folder and consulted her notes. Based on current rental market analysis, a property of this size and location would rent for approximately $6,000 to $7,000 per month. Over 22 months, that represents housing value of approximately $132,000 to $154,000. She continued, additionally, based on Margaret's financial records, she has contributed approximately $95,000 to support your lifestyle, business expenses, and personal costs during your residency here. So, in total, I said, you have received approximately $250,000 in housing and financial support over the past 22 months. That's more than most people earn in 4 years. Rachel and Kevin stared at the numbers, finally understanding the scope of my generosity and the magnitude of their miscalculation. But we were family, Rachel said weakly. We were helping each other. No, Rachel, I was helping you, and you were taking advantage of me. There's a difference. Over the following hour, as the reality of their situation sank in, Rachel and Kevin went through several stages of reaction. First was denial. This can't be real. You can't just uproot our entire life because of one conversation about living space. Then anger. This is cruel and vindictive. You're destroying my business relationships and Kevin's career stability over a misunderstanding. Then bargaining. What if we apologize? What if we promise things will be different? What if we contribute more to household expenses and respect your space better? Finally, a kind of grudging respect mixed with desperation. Mom, Rachel said, I think we've learned something important about taking family for granted. Is there any way we can start over and rebuild our relationship on better terms? Rachel, our relationship doesn't need to be rebuilt. It needs to be redefined. And that process starts with you understanding that I'm not your housing solution, your funding source, or your retirement plan. But we're still family, Kevin said. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, I replied. Which is why I'm giving you 30 days to find housing instead of having you removed immediately for trespassing. Which is why I'm not pursuing legal action for the financial exploitation of an elderly person. And which is why I'm willing to maintain a relationship with you going forward, provided it's based on mutual respect rather than your convenience. Rachel looked around the living room where she had spent the last 22 months building what she thought was her permanent life in San Francisco. What do we tell people? How do we explain that we have to leave? You tell them the truth. that family relationships require mutual respect and consideration, that your mother decided to live independently while remaining part of your life, and that this change is happening because you made some poor decisions about how to treat people who love you. Will we still see you? Kevin asked quietly. That depends entirely on how you choose to treat me going forward. If you want a relationship based on love and respect, I'm available. If you want a source of funding and housing for your lifestyle choices, I'm not. The moving truck finished loading my belongings by 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., I was standing in my new penthouse, looking out at the city and bay views that belonged entirely to me. By 4 p.m., Rachel and Kevin were frantically calling apartments and trying to figure out how they were going to afford rent in San Francisco on their actual combined income of less than $4,000 per month. The contrast between their assumptions and reality was stark. They had imagined that my wealth was somehow unlimited and that supporting their lifestyle was effortless for me. They had never considered that my generosity came at the expense of other things I might have chosen to do with my resources. Most importantly, they had never understood that respect and gratitude aren't just nice gestures. They're the foundation of any sustainable relationship, especially when one person is supporting another. Moving into my Millennium Tower penthouse was like rediscovering myself after nearly 2 years of gradual disappearance. Every room was arranged exactly to my preferences. Every piece of furniture was where I wanted it. Every decision about temperature, lighting, meals, and daily routines was mine alone. The morning routine I established was a perfect example of the freedom I had regained. I woke up when I naturally awakened, rather than being roused by Rachel's early phone calls with East Coast clients or Kevin's video conferences. I made coffee exactly the way I preferred it, using expensive beans I had always enjoyed but had stopped buying because family coffee needed to suit everyone's tastes. I read the financial news in complete silence, without interruption from Rachel's business calls, Kevin's project discussions, or requests for my input on their daily decisions. I ate breakfast at my own pace, choosing foods I enjoyed rather than accommodating 2 other sets of dietary preferences and restrictions. The view from my terrace looked out over San Francisco Bay and the city skyline, where life moved at its own rhythm without anyone asking for my permission, funding, or approval. It was a view that belonged entirely to me, that no one could claim for their content creation or use as a backdrop for their professional activities. Patricia Hensley came for coffee that first week and marveled at the transformation in my demeanor. "Margaret, you look like yourself again," she said as we sat on my terrace, watching the city come alive below us. "I hadn't realized how much you had changed during those months with Rachel and Kevin, until I see you now." "What do you mean?" "You had started walking differently, talking differently, even sitting differently, like you were trying to take up less space, be less noticeable, cause less disruption. You had made yourself smaller to accommodate their needs." She was right. I had gradually diminished myself to fit into the role they had created for me in their lifestyle structure. I had learned to defer, to accommodate, to apologize for my preferences and needs. "And now?" I asked. "Now you're sitting up straight, speaking clearly, making decisions confidently. You're Margaret Chen again instead of Rachel's convenient mother." One of the most unexpected benefits of my new living situation was the resurgence of my business interests and professional activities. Without the constant demands of family life and household management, I had mental energy and time to focus on opportunities I had neglected during my months as a full-time host and financial sponsor. James Wu approached me about partnering on a luxury development project in Marin County. "Margaret, I've missed working with you. Your understanding of property management and tenant relations always elevated our projects beyond simple real estate development. I found myself excited about the prospect of returning to active business development." "What kind of project are you considering?" "High-end condominiums targeting successful professionals who want luxury living without maintenance responsibilities. The kind of sophisticated development that requires someone who understands both property management and lifestyle marketing. Working on the project reminded me how much I had missed the intellectual challenge and creative satisfaction of real estate development. I had skills and experience that were valuable in the marketplace, not just useful for supporting family members who took my contributions for granted. I also reconnected with the San Francisco Women's Business Network, where I had served as a mentor before becoming consumed with family obligations. The organization was planning an expansion of their mentorship program for women over 50 who wanted to start or expand businesses. Margaret, we'd love to have you lead the property management and real estate investment track, said the current president, Lisa Chang. You're one of the most successful property managers in San Francisco, and you have so much knowledge to share with women who are starting their second careers. The opportunity to mentor other women and share my expertise was incredibly fulfilling. I had spent months feeling like my experience and knowledge were outdated, only to discover that there was significant demand for exactly the wisdom I had accumulated over 4 decades in business. 6 months after selling my apartment, I received a phone call that provided the perfect capstone to my journey from exploitation to empowerment. Margaret, this is James Wu. I wanted to update you on the apartment you sold me. How are things going with the property? Beautifully. I've completed some updates and improvements, and I've just leased it to a tech executive who relocated here. From Seattle, they're paying $8,500 per month for a 2-year lease. I did the quick math. James was earning $102,000 annually from the property I had sold him, while Rachel was struggling to afford $3,200 per month rent for a much smaller 1-bedroom apartment in the Mission District that she was sharing with Kevin. That's wonderful. James, I'm glad the property is being well maintained and appreciated. Margaret, I also wanted to mention that the tenant specifically commented on the beautiful renovation work and the quality of the finishes. They said it was clear that the previous owner had taken exceptional care of the property. After we hung up, I sat on my penthouse terrace and reflected on the transformation of the past year. I had gone from being taken for granted in my own home to living independently in a space designed entirely for my comfort. I had gone from funding other people's dreams to pursuing my own interests and goals. I had gone from being treated as a convenient resource to being respected as a successful businesswoman and valued professional colleague. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between being generous and being exploited, between loving family and enabling bad behavior, between accommodating others and disappearing myself. 3 months after the apartment sale, Rachel called to ask if we could meet for lunch. She had been working as a marketing coordinator at a nonprofit organization, earning steady income for the first time in years. Kevin had taken a full-time position with a tech company and was slowly rebuilding his financial stability. Mom, I owe you more than an apology, she said as we sat at a restaurant in Union Square. I owe you acknowledgement that we treated you terribly and that you had every right to protect yourself from our exploitation. Rachel, what's important now is what we do going forward. I want to understand how we got so far off track. How did we go from you generously helping me after my divorce to us treating you like a resource to be managed? It was a conversation we should have had 2 years earlier, but I was grateful she was finally ready to have it. I think it happened gradually, I said. You started asking for small favors and accommodations, and I said yes because I wanted to be helpful. But each yes made the next request seem more reasonable, until eventually you were making demands that would have seemed outrageous if you had started with them. Like asking you to move to the basement. Like asking me to pay $80,000 to move to the basement so you and Kevin could take over my apartment. Rachel, if you had suggested that, on the day you moved in, I would have thought you were joking. She was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. And I think, I continued, that you started thinking of my resources as family assets rather than my personal property. You stopped seeing my support as generosity and started seeing it as obligation. You're right. And Mom, I want you to know that losing our living situation forced us to face some hard truths about our financial management and expectations, such as the fact that Kevin and I had been living like we earned twice our actual income. We had gotten so used to your subsidies that we forgot they were subsidies, not permanent entitlements. And what's changed? We've learned to live within our means. We've found housing we can actually afford. I'm working full-time for the first time since my divorce. Kevin's earning steady income instead of trying to balance freelance work with living in luxury. And most importantly, we're building a relationship based on what we can actually contribute rather than what we can extract. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt our family relationship on completely different terms. Instead of me supporting their lifestyle, we developed a dynamic based on mutual respect and reciprocal consideration. Rachel and Kevin invited me to their new apartment for dinner once a month, and they insisted on cooking and hosting rather than expecting me to provide the meal or pay for restaurant visits. They showed genuine interest in my business activities and asked thoughtful questions about my projects rather than treating me like a source of funding for their wants. Most significantly, they stopped making any financial requests or assumptions about my support. When Rachel needed professional development training, she figured out how to budget for it. When Kevin wanted to upgrade his home office equipment, he saved money from his salary to make the purchases. "Mom," Rachel said during one of our dinners, "I want to apologize for how I acted when I was living with you. I thought you were supposed to take care of me because that's what mothers did. But I understand now that you were being generous, not obligated. And I'm sorry for being so entitled and disrespectful," Kevin added. "I didn't realize that you were letting us live in your home for free and that we should have been grateful instead of demanding." The apologies were meaningful because they came with changed behavior. Both Rachel and Kevin began treating me with consideration and respect, rather than the casual assumption that my resources and comfort were secondary to their needs. Perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our new relationship was discovering how to be a mother without being a financial sponsor or lifestyle enabler. I could enjoy Rachel's company without feeling like I was being used for my resources. I helped her develop business skills and professional networks that would serve her well in her career. I shared stories about building financial independence and making smart career decisions that gave her context for her own choices. I provided emotional support and practical advice when she asked for it, rather than having my guidance taken for granted or dismissed. Most importantly, I modeled independence, self-respect, and financial responsibility. She saw me living in a beautiful home that I had earned through my own work. She watched me pursue business interests and social activities that brought me satisfaction. She learned that older adults could be vibrant, capable, and self-determined, rather than dependent and deferential. "Mom, I want to be like you when I'm older," Rachel said during one of our museum visits. "I want to have my own money and my own home and make my own decisions about how to live." "Then you need to work hard, develop valuable skills, save money consistently, and never let anyone convince you that your preferences and comfort matter less than theirs," I replied. One of the unexpected outcomes of asserting my independence was renewed interest in business mentorship and legacy planning. Several young women in San Francisco reached out to me for advice about property management and real estate investment. "Mrs. Chen, I heard you speak at the Women's Business Network meeting," said one young entrepreneur, Amy Liu. "I'm interested in developing affordable housing projects, and I'd love to learn from your experience." Working with emerging businesswomen reminded me how much knowledge I had accumulated and how valuable that knowledge could be to the next generation of female entrepreneurs. I began considering ways to formalize my mentorship activities and possibly establish a foundation focused on women's business development in real estate. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my own daughter had dismissed my expertise as outdated, other people recognized its current value and sought my guidance for their own projects. Today, I live exactly as I choose to live. I wake up when I want to wake up, in a home that reflects my taste and preferences. I pursue business opportunities that interest me and social activities that bring me joy. I maintain relationships with family members who treat me with respect and distance myself from those who don't. Rachel has learned to appreciate our relationship instead of taking it for granted. Kevin has developed into a thoughtful young man who understands the difference between earning and expecting. And I have rediscovered the satisfaction of being Margaret Chen, successful businesswoman, independent woman, and mother on my own terms, rather than someone else's convenient resource. The basement storage area they wanted me to live in remains a basement storage area in James Wu's investment. Property used exactly as it was designed to be used. The penthouse I chose for myself has city and bay views, full-service amenities, and space for exactly one person to live exactly as she chooses. And the difference between those two options represents the difference between accepting what others think you deserve and demanding what you know you're worth. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people who take you for granted is to stop being available to be taken for granted. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members who exploit your generosity is to teach them the value of what they're losing. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone suggests you belong in the basement is to show them exactly who owns the apartment. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being taken for granted by people you love, if your generosity is being treated as obligation, if your comfort and dignity are being sacrificed for others' convenience, I want you to know that you have more power than you realize. You have the power to say no. You have the power to set boundaries. You have the power to prioritize your own well-being. And you have the power to walk away from any situation that doesn't serve your best interests, even if that situation involves family members you love. Love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. Generosity doesn't require you to enable exploitation. And being a good mother doesn't require you to disappear yourself for the comfort of others. You deserve to be treated with respect, consideration, and gratitude. You deserve to live in comfort and dignity. You deserve to make your own choices about your own life. And if the people in your life can't recognize and honor those basic truths, then maybe it's time for them to learn what life looks like without your presence and support. Trust me, the education will be worth more than any lesson you could ever try to teach them through words alone. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Have you ever been taken for granted by family members who expected you to sacrifice your own comfort for their convenience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of reclaiming power and demanding respect resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who chose themselves when others wouldn't choose them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.